Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, good morning. So today I want to talk about 3 questions you really need to consider when you're working with children who've experienced trauma so that you can have a more strategic approach to your play therapy model. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Some things to consider. My dogs are in the room today again. So if you hear weird scratching noises or moaning noises behind me, it is my crazy dogs. Lily and Luna are both in the room today. So, alrighty, so let's get started. I would love to know who's here today. Post your name in the comments, where you're from, what population you work with, and we'll get started. So I'm Cathi Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist here in the United States. I have been working with children, adolescents, and families in one capacity or another over the last, I think it's about 40 years now, maybe. 30 in the mental health field, and then also the last 20 years using play therapy and expressive arts pretty exclusively to help children and their families heal. And so one of the things, over that period of time, it's pretty likely that we end up getting children on our caseload and adolescents, families who've experienced trauma. And over the years, a lot of what I get asked when I'm working with new play therapists, new child and adolescent therapists who are also working with trauma, asking like, how do you work with trauma? Is there a best way to work with trauma? How do you use play therapy with trauma? There's a lot of questions that come up around working with children and adolescents who've experienced trauma. And in my mind, like any other approach, or like any other issue that your clients are struggling with, you really want to think about it using a framework, because your framework, I always say your framework is like your GPS system that helps you get through all of the stages of the change process. And how does your theoretical model help your client to get through all of those stages? And now we have a whole lot of information about neuroscience and attachment theory based on a lot of the research that's been done over the last several decades. And so in the play therapy arena, how do we integrate that in? Because a lot of the seminal and historical theoretical models, as they talk about in the Association for Play Therapy here in the US, that there isn't a specific neuroscience model or a specific attachment and neuroscience model. And yet we know from research that having that information provides a wealth of information so we know how to help our clients. So how do we take all of that and put it together so we can get the best results for clients? And that's today's topic, really using a strategic approach with play therapy when you're working with traumatized children and adolescents and their families. And then how do you get the best outcomes for them because we know that there are quite a few things to think about when you're using your case conceptualization process. And that's the first thing that we want to talk about today, which is case conceptualization. What do you need to consider? And if you haven't seen any of my previous live stream episodes, I have quite a few episodes on case conceptualization. I have a whole course on case conceptualization and play therapy. So if you want to know a lot more about that, then you can pop over to my website, which is, I'm going to put the banner up here. You can pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com. If you hop on the courses page, it'll give you some information about that. If you go over to my YouTube channel, Renewing Hearts Training, Cathi Spooner, and click on the live tab, you'll find all of my previous live stream episodes there. So I live stream weekly every Wednesday at 7 a.m. into my Facebook group. I'm going to move my camera a little bit here. There we go. For Instagram. I live stream weekly at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, 7 a.m. Pacific time here in the U.S. So every Wednesday I'll go live and I'll talk about all things play therapy and expressive arts. And these next few weeks, I'm going to be talking about trauma. I'm working with children who've experienced trauma using play therapy and how to help your clients get the most benefit for their healing using play therapy. So I live stream into my YouTube channel, Cathi Spooner, Renewing Hearts Training, into LinkedIn and Instagram, and also into my Facebook group, Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground, which is a Facebook group for child and adolescent therapists using play therapy and expressive arts. So if you're on Facebook and that fits you, you can pop over there and join the group. It's free. You can find all my live streams in there, as well as some other resources we talk about. You do have to answer all the questions in order to get into the group. A lot of times people don't answer all the questions and then they don't get in the group. So I always like to remind people to do that. So first and foremost, case conceptualization. What is case conceptualization? What the heck does that have to do with play therapy when we're talking about children who have experienced trauma? So essentially, case conceptualization is where you are figuring out what is the problem and why is it happening. So the behaviors are occurring. What exactly is going on that is activating those behaviors, and why is it happening? So patterns, what activated, what happens after it's activated, how does that get handled, what are some of the family relationship patterns activating that, or even some of the protective factors going on for that child. That's where you're figuring out with your case conceptualization. And specifically with trauma, you're thinking about trauma from a developmental lens. And this is a lot of, to me, when you're working with children and adolescents, you want to make sure that you're using a framework that's identifying what's going on. And that's why I like to use, whenever I structure any of my play therapy trainings on specific issues, I really like to get into the neuroscience and attachment aspects for that case conceptualization, so that when you're using play therapy, you're going to have more of a strategic idea of what's going on. So then you know how to best help your client. And in the trainings, a lot of what I'll go over is the neuroscience and attachment aspects of things. So when you're working with children who've experienced trauma, you want to think about that trauma from a developmental lens. For example, when did it start? What age did it end? How often did it happen? Was it a one-time thing? Did it happen a few times over the course of a couple years? Did it happen on a regular basis, like weekly or monthly, over the course of that child's life? So if you think about it developmentally, a child who first experiences trauma, let's say at age 3, and then the traumatic experience doesn't end until age 10, that's 7 years of child development. Think about developmentally what happens during the course of those 7 years, and then how the trauma has impacted that. So you want to think about those things. You want to think about the capacity for attachment relationships, how that traumatic experience has impacted trauma. You want to think about the type of trauma and the severity of the traumatic experiences. What were the caregivers or parents' response to the trauma? Parent capacity for tolerating their own distress while they're helping their child work through their distress. So a lot of times when you're working with children who've experienced trauma, they also have parents who have experienced trauma. There might be a generational history of trauma in that family system. So you're thinking about trauma activation, the threat response, not only for the child, but also parents. And when parents are activated or caregivers, then that limits their ability to effectively co-regulate their child through that process. So you really want to take that time in the beginning for that case conceptualization process really in the beginning, so that you understand all of the things that are unique to your specific client who's experienced trauma. And of course, we can't gather everything at that first session. If you take the time to do a thorough assessment, and then you have the rest of like that 90 days to kind of sort through things and gather more information. And I always say we're always in assessment mode throughout the play therapy process. The thing is, though, if you don't take the time in the beginning, what often happens is people kind of get lost and overwhelmed and they don't know what's going on. Whereas if you take that time in the beginning, you have a better sense of what's going on and how to help your client through all those stages of change. So that case conceptualization in the very beginning, to gather all of that information about what happened and the response to that, figuring out what are things that are likely to activate that threat response, and what works in order to deactivate that threat response. So those are important things to keep in mind for case conceptualization. So we have, hey, Carla, it's good to see you. Yes, generational trauma is no joke. It is real. And especially when you are working with children in their system, you really have to think about things systemically. That's kind of brings me to my next part here, which is what's the connection between case conceptualization and treatment planning for trauma. So when you're thinking about that intergenerational trauma, and you're also, because part of your assessment, you will have gathered in family history information, you would have gathered how parents or caregivers respond to behavior in their kids. You will have gathered that parenting approach information. And then that's going to help you with your treatment planning. So what's the connection between case conceptualization and treatment planning when you're talking about trauma? And I feel like this is something that's really important as well. So like anytime I am creating courses or trainings, one of the structure that I like to use is, one, we're doing some of that case conceptualization by going through neuroscience and attachment and kind of using that theoretical lens. And then that helps to understand the stages of the change process and what types of interventions are probably going to work best in each stage. And part of that treatment planning is going to include, how are you going to involve the parents? What is that going to look like? Because if you have parents who have experienced a history, if there's a history of trauma, then you know right off the get-go, you are probably going to have to work on some parenting approaches. And I like to use attachment-based parenting approaches. You're probably going to be working on some of that with the parents so that they know how to help and support their child, and how to tell when they get activated as parents. When do I get activated? What activates me? What do I need to do to manage that? So Sharon Ann says, yes, very true. Agreed, Sharon Ann. And these are really important things to be thinking about when you are working with children. So one of the things that I hear on a regular basis is, oh, I don't really need to do that case conceptualization, or, my theory model is much more process oriented, and we just kind of intuitively go through. And yes, there are some play therapy models that are much more structured. There are some play therapy models that are kind of in between intuitive, follow, and structured. And then there are some play therapy models that are very structured, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, that are very intuitive and follow, like child-centered play therapy, which is one that I'm trained in. I would say that's my default, is child-led. And you don't plan interventions for child-centered play therapy. However, there are stages of child-centered play therapy. There are things that are accomplished in each stage of that play therapy process. And with trauma, there are certain things that need to be accomplished. And so even though you're not in the individual play therapy sessions, you're not specifically developing interventions and leading the way. You do need to be aware of what's going on in the play therapy process, and child-centered play therapy model will influence how you understand what's going on and what is getting accomplished. You can also, like, I love child-centered play therapy. I use it all the time. It's my default, my go-to for kids, for like 8 and under kids. It's been my experience, though, that for like 9 years old and older, oftentimes I need to use a more integrated approach. And so I typically kind of switch over to more of a prescriptive play therapy approach and figure out, based on my case conceptualization, that influences my treatment planning. And then I'll use that neuroscience and attachment theory to help me figure out what needs to happen in each stage of the process. And so when you've done that case conceptualization, then you have a better idea what needs to be accomplished. Your theoretical model is still going to influence and dictate how that gets done in the sessions throughout the play therapy process. But even with child-centered play therapy, I still can use that theoretical model and understand how neuroscience and attachment theory show up in the playroom when I'm using child-centered play therapy. There isn't a specific, like I mentioned, the theoretical and historical models that are identified in the Association for Play Therapy. If you're becoming a registered play therapist, we need to take these trainings. These are the foundation here in the US, at least, and I'm pretty sure this is true outside the US. These are the foundational models that kind of got us started. And like most theoretical models, over time, we get like the next generation of what that looks like. And with the all of the information we have about neuroscience and attachment theory, we can look at that information through the lens of whatever theoretical model that we're using to identify what's going on and better understand how trauma has impacted your particular client in that moment. Because it has provided a lot of really good information. And we want to use that information to figure out what needs to be accomplished in the play therapy process. So that brings us to the third question, which is, how will your play therapy model facilitate healing? So I talked a little bit about this already, but here's the thing. You're going to use the information you've gathered at that very first diagnostic assessment session. You're going to use that information to help you formulate your case conceptualization, and that's going to help you figure out what is the best approach to use to facilitate healing for your clients. One of the things that I think about, based on the theoretical models I've been trained to use over the last 20 years in specifically play therapy, is more of a prescriptive play therapy model as well as a child-centered play therapy model. You can make the case that I'm probably more of a prescriptive play therapist, and I use child-centered play therapy as one of the tools in my toolbox, in addition to using some other approaches like trauma. If I'm working with trauma, using neuroscience and attachment, doing some directive approaches to target some of those areas. The play therapy, well, it's not a specific play therapy model, but the trauma model that I was trained in and certified in initially several years ago, probably 15 at this point, is more of an integrated approach using neuroscience and attachment and understanding sensory aspects of trauma and how play therapy and expressive arts can help to access the healing process by targeting some of that sensory information that bypasses a lot of the cognitive parts and ability to articulate and verbalize what's going on for kids who maybe are not necessarily able to for a variety of reasons, one of which is it's emotionally distressing to talk about that stuff. And they don't have a very high capacity for tolerating distress, then play therapy and expressive arts can be a way to access the areas, the targets, so to speak, that need to be resolved and changed. And so that's more of the theoretical model that I use. But here are some things to think about when you're considering what theoretical model to use, which is, what is the age of the child that you're working with? So if I'm working with a child who has experienced trauma, who's 7 or 6, I'm going to use child-centered play therapy because based on my training and experience, that theoretical model can most definitely help children work through their trauma. And there's a specific way to do that. If I'm working with children who are like 8-ish, 9 and older, I'm probably going to be using that trauma model that I was trained in through the, the National Institute for Trauma and Loss. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. It's a strategic approach, and it uses neuroscience and attachment and understanding the sensory aspects. I mean, nowadays there's a whole lot of trauma models that people are getting trained in. And then the key would be, how are you using that model and integrating it with the therapeutic powers of play within that therapeutic relationship? So it's still theory-based, like EMDR or somatic experiencing, internal family systems. A lot of those models you want to think about the age of the child and which of those models you've been trained in, and how will those work for your clients, and how will you help your client access those therapeutic powers of play through using that theoretical model. And I like to integrate in neuroscience and attachment theory because I think that gives a lot of really good information to help with the healing process. So that is it for today. I'm going to do a little recap, and then I am going to talk to you. I do have a training coming up where I kind of use the format and the structure that I just talked about today, and use that information as kind of the foundation of the training that I created, and how you can use play therapy and what each stage of the change process, lots of activities. So I'll talk a little bit more about that if you're interested. So just a recap, you really want to think about what the case conceptualization is. So you want to go through that case conceptualization process so you fully understand how your client has been impacted by their traumatic experiences. And then there's going to be a variety of factors that are going to influence that impact on your client. And how are you going to integrate parents, and what's parent capacity for tolerating navigating through the traumatic experience for their child, and how are they going to handle that, and what kind of support parents need. So all of that goes in, you're gathering all of that information through your case conceptualization so that you can then make that connection between here's my case conceptualization and here's the treatment planning process. Here are the factors to consider. I want to think about culture. How does culture play a role? That's the case conceptualization. Do I need to address that in treatment? What are some resiliency factors? I want to support those, including cultural resiliency factors. I want to make sure to support those in the treatment process. What kind of theoretical model do I want to use that will work with this specific client based on a variety of factors, including age, what I'm trained to do? And so you really want to think about that connection, and that's part of your treatment planning process. That's going to help you figure out, so here's what we need to do and how we're going to help this child overcome the impact of this trauma. And then the third thing is, how is your play therapy model going to facilitate healing? You want to figure out what needs to be accomplished using a theoretical model. How are you going to access the therapeutic powers of play to help your child heal? What model are you trained to use that will work well with this type of client, with these presenting issues, age, and those kinds of things? And I believe we can use the information that we've been able to access through decades of research in neuroscience and attachment theory, because it gives us a lot of information we can use with our play therapy model to help us understand what's going on and how that play therapy model is going to help my client heal. So that is it for today. If you found this information helpful, please feel free to share it across your social media platforms. If you're interested in some of my previous live streams based on some of these topics, you can pop over to my website. Pop over to my YouTube channel and click on the live tab. You'll find all the replays in there. If you're in my Facebook group, they will be I pin all of the live streams into the featured section, so you can find them in there. So if you're interested in the trainings that I have a live webinar coming up in September, on Saturday, September 16th. We're going to go through that case conceptualization process by understanding trauma and the impact of trauma from a neuroscience and attachment theory lens. and then using that information to conceptualize for the treatment planning of understanding here are the stages of the treatment process. In this stage, you want to focus on this, and here are some play therapy interventions you can use for that, and here's how they'll help, and here's what they're going to target. So with that, and plus we do a lot of interaction, a lot of experiential. You'll do a lot of interacting with your peer group. It gets a lot of support that way. So if you're interested in that, you can pop over to my website. That training live webinar is Play Therapy for Traumatized Children and Teens. There are 2 registration versions on there, one that has continuing education hours and one that does not. So that way people that need the continuing education hours, the CEs, you can purchase that registration option. Or if you don't need the CEs, you can register using the registration process that does not offer CEs, and that's a little bit cheaper. Also, I do have Play Therapy Academy. It's my online play therapy consultation program. We meet twice a month. We do a lot of case conceptualization. We do a lot of staffing of cases. It's a really supportive group to help you learn how to take that information that you've gathered from trainings and reading and apply it in real time with your clients. So if you're interested in Play Therapy Academy, you can pop over to my website as well and go on the supervision page. So that's going to help you feel more confident. You're going to get a lot more support. If you're feeling like an imposter, then that is definitely the group for you, because you will definitely gain a lot of support and begin feeling a lot more confident by participating in that program. So, and the links are in the comments below if you're interested in the link about Play Therapy Academy, if you're interested in the link to find out more about the play therapy training, play therapy with traumatized children and teens, then you can pop over there, and I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.